go over customizations, new commands. I'll talk about layers and then the help tab. Opening up Rhino, again, if you miss that first window that pops up, just hit new and then scroll down to small objects -inches. It'll open this right up. We'll open up the top view. First thing I want to cover is customizations. So I will change this into dark mode, which I think is a little easier in the eyes. Click File, Properties, then go down to Appearance, Colors, and then from light, change to dark, and you can hit OK. You can also do some custom changes if you'd like. I'll often change selected objects. Instead of this yellow, I'll change it to a bright green, because sometimes I'll have a yellow layer, but I usually won't have like a neon green layer. So let's do that now. Okay, so here's what that looks like. Instead of this highlighting yellow, it turns to this bright neon green. I find it a little easier to see when I'm selecting things. Next thing I'll do, going back into File, Properties, we'll click on about halfway down the screen under Rhino Options is Aliases. Aliases are basically hotkeys, so instead of typing in the entire command like polyline or reaching across the keyboard to hit the P and the O to start off polyline, I can instead create a new one. I'll make G for polyline. So now instead of taking my hand off the mouse and typing in P or POL to initiate polyline, I can just hit the G key, and you can see under command it says G, but if I right click, since G hotkey is now assigned to polyline, I can activate polyline. So I'll often make aliases for my most used commands, and I'll tie that closer to keys on my left hand. That way, as I work, it improves my efficiency. I don't have to take my right hand off the mouse. I can use the left hand to issue all my commands and my right hand to continue drawing. Here's some other aliases I like to use. I like to use curve Boolean a lot, so I make that CB. And I'll go over what that command does. I use InterpCrv a lot. I make that T. And I use change layer, so I'll make this C. As you progress in Rhino, you'll find some commands you use more often than others. Those are the ones I suggest you program into aliases. Let's go over two new commands. I have InterpCrv and curve Boolean. So let's go over InterpCrv first. InterpCrv is on the top row, the fourth icon here. If you look at the icon, the bottom right corner, there's a little gray triangle. If you hover over that triangle and click, this submenu pops up, and this shows you all the different curve options. We're only going to focus on the first two. So the first one is control point curve, which is just, the command for that is just curve. The way to activate it is, I'm going to just click on the middle points of all sides of this square, and you come out with a curve based on those points. I find it a little less intuitive to use, especially if I'm tracing an image, which I'll show you later. So the command I like to use the most often is actually InterpCrv, which is the second icon here. The command here is InterpCrv, and remember we programmed that to T. So if I click the mid of all of these, you see that the points go, the curve actually goes through that control point that I land. So I find it easier to trace an image, and then the points go more intuitively to where I want it to go to. The next commands I want to talk about is trim and curve Boolean. So these two commands are really important for marquetry work. These different shapes, they don't really make sense. So for example, if this circle, as said, I think walnut, if I sent this through, it would cut this little notch out and all these other tiny pieces in here. So the first thing I want to do is trim the pieces that I don't want to show up. So for this example, let's actually put the circle in the far background. We'll put the triangle in the middle and the square at the forefront of our design. I'm going to select all the objects. I can either click and drag across, or if I hit Control and A, it selects everything on my screen. the next thing I'll do is I want to trim away the parts I don't want. So you can either type in trim and hit enter, or what I find the most useful is I hold Control and T. That also activates trim. It's a shortcut. So again, the circle's in the back, the square's in the front, so I'm going to trim away all the pieces that are in the square. The triangle's in the middle, so I'm going to trim away all the pieces in the triangle, and then I'll right click to execute that command, and then I'll left click to deselect all these objects. So if you look at this, I have the square, this rectangle is at the forefront, the triangle looks a little further behind, and the circle looks like it's furthest behind all those objects. If I wanted to cut this out now, I send it to the CNC laser machine, how would I do that? Right, I can't just select this circle and cut it because there's this opening here. All it's going to do is cut this line through my material. But what I could do is trim away the parts that are on the outside of that circle and then send this through. So then when I want to cut the walnut circle, this is all I need, right? Because all the other parts are just kind of going to fit in there. But it's a little clunky when you do that. And when I do trim, it doesn't join the pieces together. So these are all separate, and there's a chance you could move this accidentally. So the next command we'll talk about is curve Boolean. I'm going to hit Control A, select all these pieces again, and either type in curve Boolean, or the command I did was CB, right click. Now what curve Boolean does is it creates a curve within the shape that you click in. So imagine you have a bucket of water where my mouse is. If I want this shape, I just click in there, and then I'll right click. And now I have this shape, and it is one solid object. So there's no breaks in this. Let's do that for these other parts as well. One for the square, one for this bottom part of the triangle, and then of course one for the window itself. Curve Boolean can be a little tricky to master. For example, this flower here, let's look at just this shape here. If I select it, I hit curve Boolean, the alias again we programmed as CB, and then I right click. Now let's say I want these 5 distinct shapes. You might think, oh, I can just click them all, and then if I click and drag this over, instead of having 5 distinct shapes, I have the outline of everything. So what's happening is curve Boolean will fill in the object that you click into, but if you click into an adjacent object and these 2 objects share a line or a wall, it makes it into one giant piece. So the way around that is if you accidentally click and you see that, you can just click back into that thing, into the object that you last used. And what I'll do is I'll have to do this in batches. So for example, this petal, I see that these 2 aren't connected, so I can do these 3. Now I'm going to right click. I'll drag this off to the side. I'll select this again. I know that this petal and this petal aren't sharing any walls. I'll right click. I can drag that off to the side. And then I'll come back again, right click, left click into that object, right click again. As a reminder, right click activates the command and right click ends the command as well. So now instead of the outline of this entire object, I have 5 distinct objects. Now I can use this feature of curve Boolean to my advantage as well. For example, to create the outline, this window of my columbines here, if I select all these objects, I hit CB, right click. Instead of clicking all these pieces in order to get this, I can also click on the outside of this, and it gets me this object. Now I can just delete this frame and I'll have this cut out. Let's talk about layers now. The layers are on the right hand side of the screen. I'm going to drag this open a little bit so then you can kind of see all the things that are in these layers. What we're going to use the most are these first 5 columns. So we have the name of the layer, the active current layer, hide and unhide, lock, unlock, and the color of the layer. So let's go through the first column. These are layer names. If I want to change the name, I can either hover over it, right click, and go to rename. or just double click on the name of the layer. For this first layer, I'll call window. The next layer, I'll call walnut. Let's call this cherry, and we'll call that maple. Now, as I click through these, the check mark moved as well. The check mark shows your active layer. What that means is if I were to draw another object, it would land in the maple layer. So for example, let's draw a rectangle. You can see that rectangle is now blue because it's in that layer. Let me minimize this a little bit more. Now that I have these different layers created, let's change the object into the next layer. So I'm going to select this. Remember I said this was walnut. Let's change it into the walnut layer. So I can either right click on walnut now and then go to change object layer. Now if I click off of walnut, if I left click off walnut, you'll see I'm in the walnut layer, which is red. The other way I can do it, I'm going to select this piece, I want to change it to cherry. Instead of right clicking and going to change object layer, remember one of the aliases I programmed was change layer, which was on the C command. So I'll type C, right click, and then I can just click onto that. And then here's a checkbox that says set layer to current. If I don't do that, I'll remain on the layer that I already have active and it doesn't go over. But if I do select that, it will change this into the layer I picked, which was cherry, and then also make the cherry layer active. So the last one here, I'll change it to maple. So here I have the window, which is in the window layer, that's black. Walnut is in the red layer. Cherry is in my purple layer, and then maple is on my blue layer. We can also change the color of the layers as well. So for example, window, if I click onto that square, I have this whole selection of colors that I can pick. So let's change it to orange instead. That doesn't show up quite as well. I'm going to hit Control Z and change that back. These other options here, the next column is show and hide, the light bulb. So if I click the light bulb, you can see my black layer disappears. It's still there, but I can't click it or interact with it in any way. To use it, I have to click that light bulb again, it brings back up, and then I can work and manipulate that object again. The next column is the lock unlock. What lock does is it makes it so the item is still visible, but now you can't click or interact with it in any way. This is really useful when we're tracing images. For example, as I trace over it, you might accidentally grab that image and then move the image, which messes up your tracing. One of the trickiest parts about the layers window is actually the second column, which shows what layer you have active. For example, here I have cherry that's highlighted in blue, but my active window is actually the walnut red layer. So for example, if I were to draw another object, I might think that it's going to go into the purple cherry layer, but since my walnut actually has that check mark, the next object I'm going to draw is going to be in that red layer. So if you draw this object, again, we can just change the layer. So if I click it, hit C, right click, I can move it into the cherry layer that I want. In order to change the layer, I can either go down the second column and double click in there, or I can click over the name of the layer and double click. Be careful when you do that one though, because if you click too much, you'll enter into the rename feature. Just hit escape and you'll exit out of that. Here's a great example of why you need these different layers when we're doing marquetry, inlay, and other laser work. If I go into this first layer and I show it, you'll see this is a picture of column lines that I took. And from this picture, I did a tracing of it, which I'll demonstrate in the next video. And then I have these other layers available that show my tracings, my layer. The window layer, I typically color as blue. So visually, I am more consistent. So immediately, if I see blue on my screen, I know that's my window. Then I have a parts layer with sub layers as well that I name for the different components that I've drawn here. To get all these different parts of the flower, stem, and petals, again, I could select these and then trim away the excess. Or if I have everything selected, I do curve Boolean, or the alias for that is CB, right click, and I just click into the parts that I want. The last feature I'll talk about is the help menu. Let's say, for example, let's activate rectangle. So I type in REC, I'll right click, and then you'll see in the command line here, I have all these different options that I can select. And you might think, what does that mean? How do I find out? Well, this is what the help menu is for. I'm going to hit escape to exit out of that command. The help menu you can find in two different spots. Along this toolbar here, the very end is the help topics. And then over on the right hand side in the layers menu, you see it again. So let's click that. It opens up a web document that has all the commands listed. I go to the top right here, I'll type in rectangle. This page now gives me all the details of rectangle. You can see down here it has default 3-point vertical center. If I go back into Rhino, these are the options that are selected. 3-point vertical center, round curve, rounded. Let's look at what rounded does. So rounded rounds the corners of the rectangle with arcs or conic sections. So to do it, you have to pick the radius of the rounded corner. Let's give that a shot. To activate it, I'm going to enter rectangle, and now I can either click on rounded to turn it on, or you see how the R is underlined in rounded? I can hit R again, right click, and then it'll activate rounded for me. To use rounded, I draw my rectangle. Now when I move my mouse further away, it rounds those corners for me. As you can see, the help feature is really useful. It gives you better detail on commands we've already used, and if you're looking at a new command, it can give you a full tutorial on how to use it. That's a wrap for this video. In the next video, we're going to do a deep dive on how to trace an image and start your first inlay or marquetry project.